Today we're going to start our study of England's American colonies. England is the European power that primarily colonizes the eastern seaboard of North America, with the exception of Spain, who's in Florida, and then obviously the French in Canada. So the first colonies for Great Britain, you had two steps. First step, get a charter or a certificate of permission from the king. Second step, you've got to form a joint stock company. A joint stock company was founded by investors who were trying to promote British interests and then make a profit. The English are after money. That is their motivation for colonizing the New World. Spain is more of an expansion of Christianity, and the English first settlers to the Jamestown and stuff, they're looking for profit. That's what they're all about. So the Jamestown colony itself, they decide on Jamestown by virtue of that's where they end up, but they end up in a pretty good spot, all things considered. So it's got really good land and navigable rivers, which means obviously a water source, which is good, and it gives them some protection from the Native Americans as well. So early colonists make the mistake of refusing to farm, and so they're looking for gold and silver. Which is stupid because there is no gold and silver in Virginia. If you've seen Pocahontas, you know that. And then John Smith, who is more than blonde-haired, blue-eyed Adonis, played by Mel Gibson in a Disney movie. He was a real person, although he didn't look like that at all. I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. He was a short, portly man with a very inflated sense of self-importance. But he ultimately emerges as the leader of the new colony, and for all of his faults, he does actually get them through that first winter, and the reason they survive is because of him. So Powhatan is the leader of the Native American tribe near to Jamestown, and he wants to avoid confrontation. He's also a character in Pocahontas, if that's your thing. So Powhatan's trying to avoid a confrontation with the white people, but obviously that doesn't happen. And he's just among, 30 some odd tribes that are living in the area. But here's the thing, is that the colonists are after the land. And remember that natives do not have any sense of private property. The idea of private property to them is ludicrous. The land belongs to the earth. And so the idea of private property is a completely foreign concept to them. And so the idea of owning land doesn't make sense. And so because the colonists are after their native land, that means that they're going to do whatever it takes. The English capture Pocahontas. And there we are, back to Disney. And she ends up marrying a guy named John Rolfe. She doesn't marry John Smith. If you've seen Pocahontas 2, there is a straight-to-DVD sequel. She does actually meet John Rolfe and stuff. But I'm getting sidetracked. At any rate, Pocahontas, that's what Disney makes them look like. Obviously, there's Mel Gibson there, and then there's Pocahontas. That's what John Smith actually looked like, so you can see that's really not it. He was a thick boy. And then you've got Pocahontas. This is in her English garb after she married John Rolfe. But, so there we are. Disney versus reality. Tobacco. Tobacco is going to become the main staple of Virginia, and John Rolfe is going to be the brains behind the operation. He figures out how to grow tobacco, and that is going to be a massive, massive cash crop. It's what Jamestown is going to use to support itself as it moves forward. The Virginia Company, which is the joint stock company that was formed to found Jamestown, is going to start a system called the headright system. It basically, anyone who paid their own or someone else's way to Virginia received 50 acres of land for free. So that's a pretty good incentive, especially when you're talking about, this is still, 17th century England. So the idea of owning land was extraordinarily attractive to people who would not have been able to do so in England. Remember, land in England is ancestral. It gets passed down from generation to generation. And if at no point in your family did anybody own land, it is very unlikely that you are going to. So the idea of getting free land in the New World was extraordinarily attractive. And so that brought a ton of settlers to Virginia, but it also allowed wealthy people to create these huge plantations, which they then used to grow tobacco, which obviously made them even more wealthy. So in 1619, this is a year before the Mayflower, the Virginia Company is allowed to form what's called the House of Burgesses. And it is extraordinarily significant because it is the first representative body in colonial America. They could make laws and they could raise taxes. And the House of Burgesses is going to be the first example of what's called the principle of salutary neglect, which basically means that the Great Britain allowed self-rule in the colonies, and it starts with the House of Burgesses. And so this policy of salutary neglect, which starts in 1619, of Great Britain allowing self-rule in the colonies, is what's going to ultimately set the stage for the American Revolution. It's why Americans get so resentful of British interference in their laws and in their lives in the 1760s and 70s. So there's a couple of different types of colonies that were established in the New World by England. You had a royal colony, and then you had a proprietary colony. So a royal colony, it belongs to the king, obviously, and it has a governor that is appointed by the king. A proprietary colony, by contrast, belonged to a wealthy person who raised the money to establish it. So this is sort of a private colony, essentially, is what proprietary means. The governor was usually somebody who was powerful enough in the group that started the company. So it was kind of, it was an inside job, powerful individual in the joint stock company. And then most of the colonies, though, had governing elected assemblies, which, like the House of Burgesses, could make laws and raise taxes. And so that brings us back again to salutary neglect, this ability of self-rule. So that's a huge big deal as we go forward. The one downside to all of this is ultimately you end up with people who are unhappy, and you end up with rebellions. And the first big rebellion in the colonies for England is called Bacon's Rebellion. So it's a guy named Nathaniel Bacon, and the causes of the rebellion are a growing population and indentured servitude. The idea behind indentured servitude is that you get somebody who sponsors your voyage to the New World, and then in return you give them 4 to 7 years of service. And once you finish your term, then you get free land. That's the idea. So the problem was that they were starting to run out of land to give people. And so you have the royal governor in Virginia, who is William Berkeley. He's trying to raise taxes, and he refuses to move the Indians out of the way. And that's Nathaniel Bacon's issue. He's like, you need to act as the governor, move these Indians out of the way so we can give our people the land that they have earned through this time of service. And so Bacon, when Berkeley refuses to do that, Bacon organizes the colonists, and then they attack. And they attack Jamestown. They march to Jamestown. They set it on fire. But the problem then comes when Bacon suddenly dies. He dies almost immediately after the attack on Jamestown. And so his whole mission kind of collapses with him. And then what ends up happening is you get a new royal governor. He lowers taxes. He's a much more popular man than William Berkeley was. But the significance of Bacon's Rebellion is that it signifies sort of the end of indentured servitude and the switch to slavery. So slaves don't need free land. Slaves are property. They will work because they have to, because they're enslaved. So that's the key thing for Bacon's Rebellion, is that it signifies the end of indentured servitude as a widely accepted and implemented practice in the colonies, and it leads to an increased reliance on the institution of slavery. And that brings us to the southern colonies. This is your map of the southern colonies. These are what are considered southern colonies. You have Virginia, obviously, the Carolinas, Georgia, and then Maryland. So Maryland, we're going to start up at the north and move our way down. Maryland was a proprietary colony, founded as a refuge for Catholics. Yay! By a guy named Lord Baltimore. Lord Baltimore's our guy, a.k.a. George Calvert. and he is a Catholic, and so he pieces out of England and founds a colony for Catholics. They allowed slavery, and their main crop is tobacco. That is pretty much how they support themselves. It is the only southern colony founded for religious reasons. Everything else was done to make money, but Maryland is a religious colony. Next, you've got the Carolinas. It is mostly tobacco and rice. They are proprietary colonies, founded by a group called the Lords Proprietors, named for King Charles. Ultimately, it's divided into North and South. And then after a while, they both become royal colonies later on, and obviously they allow slavery. Next, you've got Georgia, which was a proprietary colony founded by a guy named James Oglethorpe. Great name. Love that name. And his primary reason for founding the colony was as a haven for people in debt. If you were in debt in England, you could go to prison. So if you owed somebody money, or you owed some kind of official money, you could be imprisoned. And if it was enough money, they could probably execute you too. So, Oglethorpe was trying to be nice. And so trying to give people who are in debt in England a place to go so that they wouldn't be imprisoned. Initially, slavery wasn't allowed. But ultimately, once they start, realizing that Georgia's got really great land for agriculture, slavery becomes, laws against slavery are abolished after it becomes a royal colony. So, the reason that England allows this haven for debtors in the first place is because they want to prevent the expansion of Florida. But then, Oglethorpe had all these strict rules in place about, behavior and different things. He was kind of puritanical that way. And so when the settlers get fed up with all that, they turn it over. They turn themselves over to become a royal colony. And then that's the end of that. And slavery becomes implemented in Georgia. So that's sort of the establishment of the early English colonies, at least for Jamestown and the South. And we'll get to New England and the Middle colonies a little later on.